Good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started with our next panel. Everybody can get seated. That would be appreciated. Hello, hello. Thanks to everyone again for coming. Welcome to EVN 2019. Shh. Thank you, Justin. My name is Liz Howard. I am counsel in the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. I am delighted to be on a panel with these three fine gentlemen, each of who I know. These are three of the four EAC commissioners, so the United States Election Assistance Commission. I will start with Ben Hovland. He is a former staffer for the Secretary of State in Missouri. Most recently, he was working on the Rules Committee and just was recently confirmed to the EAC. So welcome. Thank you, Commissioner Hovland, for joining us. Commissioner Tom Hicks has been with the commission now 6 or 4 years. Oh, wow. Okay. He's formerly he's formerly with the Committee on House Administration, so he's very familiar with much of the work that the EAC does, and with election officials. He has been a tireless traveler to go actually work with and see what election officials have to overcome. And this last gentleman, Don Palmer, I know very well, and have known Commissioner Palmer for a long time. As the former chief election official in Virginia and in Florida, he is just not familiar at all with any of the hurdles that election officials face across the country. We are delighted to have them here today. They are going to start off with a slide deck to talk about the EAC's role in election integrity.
Good morning, everyone. So I am no longer chair, so I think I surprised a few folks this morning. The EAC turns over our chairmanship each year. It rotates, Democrat, Republican, and each person gets to serve 1 year as chair. So as of the 24th of February, almost a month ago, I am no longer chair. But I am still a commissioner. Boo, boo, hiss, hiss, boo. And I'm very happy to have my two newest commissioners join the commission. It was done at the last day of the 115th Congress, basically with 2 hours left. They were confirmed, and we've hit the ground running with a lot of different things that we'll go through today. So most of you might not know exactly what I don't know if this is a touchscreen. No, it's not. So let's do it this way.
So what is the EAC? Glad you asked. EAC stands for Election Assistance Commission. And simply put, our goal is to make your job easier. No, seriously. We were established by the Help America Vote Act of 2002 as an independent, bipartisan commission charged with helping Americans vote. The primary way we do that? By ensuring election officials have the support and resources they need. We help in a few ways. We craft and adopt the voluntary voting system guidelines, accredit test laboratories, and certify voting systems, serve as the nation's clearinghouse of information and best practices related to elections. We also maintain the National Mail Voter Registration Form, which can be used to register to vote, update registration information with a new name or address, or register with a political party, and develop recommendations and standards that address the needs of voters, state and local election leaders, and other election stakeholders. At the end of the day, we work to ensure every eligible American has the opportunities to vote independently, privately, and with confidence in our nation's election system. We do everything in our power to make sure election officials have what they need to support that. Learn more at eac.gov.
So that's a quick overview of what the agency does. And I want to apologize for missing part of the conference yesterday. As Liz indicated, we travel a lot in this job. and we meet with election officials from around the country and sometimes from around the world. And Don Palmer and I had the opportunity to go out to the Council of State Governments conference in San Diego to meet with election officials, but also had the wonderful opportunity to see one of our most renovated aircraft carriers and talk to our men and women serving overseas. So we went aboard that aircraft carrier America, talked with some enlisted folks and talked to some officers about some of the challenges that they face, and got some really good information back on things that I didn't know that they face, because I always thought, hey, why don't you just download your ballot and send it back? Well, these ships are basically locked down in terms of, I think it said something, someone here would know this better than me, of what megabytes and so forth are. But they said basically that they have 10 megabytes per the entire ship. So people only get like 2 or 3 minutes per day to actually go online. So they can't download YouTube videos or go to Facebook and things like that. So they're very structured on what they have to do in certain things. So one of the things that I wanted to say with that is make sure that when you are crafting thoughts to take to Congress and move forward with things, to think about those things as well, that access is very important to some of the things that we all want to see happen. This will that was put together by our testing and certification program in conjunction with election officials shows some of the issues that election officials face. Most of you in this room are really geared towards security and ADA compliance and technology, but election officials deal with a whole lot more than that. Election laws, logistics, tabulation, canvassing, finance overall, voter registration, all the way up to election night reporting. So as this shows, the purple part is ongoing. The yellow-green is more of before, and the teal or so is, I'm feeling like I'm colorblind for a second here, so is more so election night and beyond. So, but you didn't want to hear about past stuff. You want to know what we're doing moving forward. So for priorities, I'm still going to look at the past a little bit. So last year, Congress gave us $380 million to give out to the states to help improve the process. The EAC got that money out by September 20th. So it was signed basically a year ago by the president, and we hit the ground running, getting that money out, getting the narratives back from the states, and getting all of that money out. It was done on a basis of population. So California got the most, and smaller states like Montana and Idaho basically got $3 million, which was the basis of it. This was supposed to be used for a whole host of things. So it was put in Title I, which allowed for it to be pretty widespread. So in terms of security and communications, and then all the way down to other aspects of getting rid of aging technology and so forth. So this is a chart that shows where the pieces of that money went. Darker colors show more so of the more amount of money that the states received, and lighter colors are more so to the portions of the ones where they got the $3 million or so. So how did the states use that money? Most of that money went towards cybersecurity, and that's pretty broad in terms of what that means. That could mean cyber scans and updating software or so forth, to purchasing of new equipment, to hiring new IT staff, purchasing new equipment, voter registration. Those three categories compile to over 70% of what that money is allocated for. The monies can be used up until 2023, which is unlike the previous harbor funds, which go on indefinitely in terms of if you have it, you can spend it later on. If you don't spend it by March of 2023, it reverts back to the U.S. Treasury. We're starting to get those reports back now. Since I was on an involuntary vacation for 35 days between December and January, we weren't able to receive our the reports from the states that were due on December 31st, but those are coming in now, and so we're finding out more so of what the states were using that money for. The other basic negative part of that is that because the money went out by September 20th, and it's a negative and a positive, I'll try to remain as positive as I can, is that most of that money wasn't spent for the 2018 cycle, because we want the states to be good stewards of this money and not just to throw it out there. So most of that money will be spent in 2020 and 2022 moving forward. So I don't have the exact numbers yet of how much money has been spent, but the overall proportions of that money will be spent in 2020, and we're hoping that most of the states will look towards, at least initially, looking to replace their voting equipment overall. This is a listing of how the state spent that money. It's in individual states and who did what, and this should be available on our website because I only have like 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. So this is a better indication of how that money were spent overall. But we would like to, in our capacity at the EAC, as the other commissioners will go and talk about the VBSG and other aspects of it, work with you to ensure that all aspects are taken care of. Yes, I spent basically 3 months on the road last year, going to different states, talking to them about what the EAC can do, what we can't do to move things forward, but not just with election officials, but also advocates. And I want to thank, I don't know if Michelle's still in here, Michelle Bishop, because she always tries to get me to, and I'm not always great at it, of sitting down with advocates to hear what their issues are as well, and so forth. And seeing things through their eyes in terms of how the difficulties that they face in moving forward with issues. I was lucky enough to talk to a couple of other countries about their cybersecurity issues, because the issues that we face in the U.S. for democracy is not just unique to us. So the British and the Australians, the folks from the Netherlands all face the same sort of interference issues that we've faced moving forward. And lastly, because I think that's the last slide for me. Yeah. So lastly, in my 1 minute left, I'm no longer chair, but I wanted to ensure that folks know that the first 3 words out of our mouths when we are sworn in is, "I will faithfully discharge the Constitution of the United States," and that means to defend and support. And so that is my job, to ensure that every person who is eligible to vote has the opportunity to vote and have those votes counted accurately. And so I will continue to do that for as long as I'm sitting in this seat. And hopefully, if folks have questions, feel free to give me a call or write or email or so forth, or stop me here today. But again, I love coming to this conference because I know that folks aren't shy, which is good sometimes. But also, you don't get change without dialogue. And so as someone who has had to fight for a lot of things in my life to get where I am today, I know that you have to fight to get things changed. So that doesn't mean that you're going to get everything you want, but that also means that there has to be some sort of compromise. And this is the last thing I'll say, because I think I have 30 seconds left, is that in my 11 years on the Hill, no legislation was passed and signed by the president that was just one party. So as we move forward with any sort of legislation, it has to be a bipartisan piece of legislation and supported by both parties in both chambers, or it's not going to be signed for the most part. So compromise has got to be the word of today. I try to say that in my life. It doesn't always work because I'm bigger than my kids, but it's not always what you get. Is it improving the process? And so that's what I hope we can do, and hopefully as we move forward, to continue on with that. And with that, I'll stop and turn it over to Commissioner Palmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz, for inviting me. It's really good to be here. We were just confirmed, and we hit the ground running. Obviously, we just met with some election officials. I would like to, election and security is one of those things that is a bipartisan belief and principle. When I was in Virginia and in Florida, members of the legislature of both parties would come to me and talk to me, how can we make sure that our voting equipment, our electronic poll books, how can our tabulators be safe and secure? How do we know it's accurate? How can we know that the winner is the winner and the loser is the loser, so we don't have things that tear our country apart trying to determine who in fact may have been the winner? And so that's one thing I think that the EAC is able to bring to the table, is that we're a bipartisan agency that is focused on this. We bring our experiences to the table as an election official and myself, and I know there are many election officials in the room. We are not we may be intelligent folks, we may be very interested, we listen, but we know that there are certain things in security and IT that we need to be listeners and to try to understand as much as possible. And that's one reason we're here today, and our ears are open, and we want to listen. And one of the things that we did in Florida and Virginia, and at the EAC, one of the most important things we do is the scrutinizing of our systems. Now, HAVA gave the EAC certain powers with regards to the review of voting systems on a voluntary basis. So these are not required standards, but we do have a testing and certification program that's that critical first step. And I say first step because states have their own, most states have their own review and certification programs where they do their reviews, penetration testing, they do their own reviews, and then they certify that they meet the standards not only of the state. So when the EAC looks at a system, it's often going to be that initial bottom review, that general review of that system to make sure that it's certified for use in the states. In that aspect, we have 3 committees, but we're going to focus a little bit today on the Technical Guidelines Development Committee, which I served on for a number of years when I was an election official. These committees, the advisory board and the standards board, made up of election officials across the country, they provide and they assist the EAC, providing us input on standards development, which we're going through a process now, which will culminate in 2.0, and also sort of give us guidance on other issues regarding accessibility, security, usability, that the voters are going to be able to use that equipment. And so we have to take all these factors together in developing these standards. And our primary goal is to make sure we can administer an election, that individuals have the right to vote and they can vote, and that people with disabilities or people who have certain challenges can all participate in the program. I like to say that election officials, it's really our duty to make sure, and a lot of people help, but it's our duty in the end to make sure no one gets left behind. Because their individuals have individual experiences and challenges to vote. And we have to make a system that works for everybody. So again, I talked a little bit about 2.0. We are now in the process where we have voting system guidelines, high-level guidelines, which we are now in a comment phase for these new specification requirements. We're going to be continuing to work with our advisory boards to come up with those requirements and test assertions in which those new standards, the voting manufacturers will test to those standards. That's going to be ongoing this year. I hope that you will participate, talk to us online, officially, offline, talk to us about your expectations of what you see in the 2.0. That's a little bit of history now. We are in the 90-day period, and there'll be an adoption probably later this year. And there will be a new approach. I really do think there's an opportunity to revolutionize the way not only we develop standards, but also sort of the way we do testing. As a state election official, I was always concerned, obviously, to make sure we get the job right, but that we also be flexible enough and efficient enough that we can get new products with new security, new accessibility to the marketplace so election officials can buy this equipment and it can be used by the voter. It's all a process that we need to be, that's a holistic approach. So auditing is something that EAC and states have been involved with for a long time. One of the new initiatives is risk of living audits. This is where a number of states we have worked with we provided grant funds, so individual states and localities can actually pilot these programs and feel comfortable enough that they can do this on a large-scale basis. It can be challenging. There are different types of audits. Risk limiting audits can be challenging, but it's something that if we pilot and there's a comfort level or a number of cycles, perhaps we can get there. EAC does a lot of highlighting best practices across the country. We have a lot of localities, a lot of states who do things differently. We're a very decentralized system, but out of that laboratory are best practices that we can work with to identify, look, this works, and we want to be a clearinghouse for those practices, including security practices. In that spirit, we have awards that we provide for localities that provide innovation. They use technology for innovation, including, for example, risk limiting audits. For example, I believe one of our winners was a locality that used risk limiting audits as a pilot. We also, the Secretary of State of Iowa did a program that increased accessibility for veterans and voters with disabilities. So we look at those categories and we provide these clearies each year. We encourage you to do pilots and programs and then submit these for the national competition. And these are where our best practices can sort of foster. And here's a list of some of the, I'm getting ahead of myself all the time. Here's a list of the past Cleary Award winners. And as you can see, the Iowa Secretary of State and a number of others. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, we do?
Yes.
Yeah, Tina.
Okay. Hey! So we get to be cheerleaders often. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ben Hovland, and he's going to talk about what we're doing in the security field with the Government Coordinating Council.
I'm a little shorter than Don. Great to be here. Thank you all for having us. It is exciting to, as Don said, he and I are the newest commissioners. I think maybe technically he went in about a half second before me, so that makes me the new guy, I guess. As you all know, we didn't have a quorum for about 10 months. More than just having a quorum restored, we actually have a full contingent for the first time. My seat in particular, I've been telling people was vacant for 9 years, 11 months, and 7 days. So it's good to be there. The thing I've also been telling people is now with just 6 weeks on the job, I've done more than anyone in that seat in over a decade. So, not everybody gets to say that. And I did think that that's why they made me vice chair after 3 weeks, but as Tom explained earlier, we just rotate. So anyway, good to be vice chair and all the glory that comes with it. And that's why I get to come here and finish up. So we'll hit back to the PowerPoint. I'll try to stay closer. So we heard, actually, there was a lot of talk about Government Coordinating Council and there we go, and critical infrastructure designation. This is obviously a major change in the election space. This was new in 2017, and we saw bumps along the way, but I think it really is maturing into something that will be useful. Obviously, one of the biggest things with the Government Coordinating Council is establishing those communications channels. We certainly, there was certainly a lot of pushback in 2017 and concern. And so now we've got this Government Coordinating Council. It allows folks from across the spectrum, from, I won't go through the whole acronym again, but from state and local governments, the EAC, our partners at DHS, secretaries of state, state election directors, are all able to be in a room or on phone calls periodically and just educate each other to what's going on and help work through plans where if there are incidents in the future, everyone knows who they're supposed to talk to, which is a significant step forward. I mean, as we've heard, you've got 8,000 jurisdictions around the country who are doing a great job. But with that decentralization are real communications challenges, and I think that the Government Coordinating Council will go a long way to help move the ball forward as far as being able to get out important security issues across the country as they need to. I'll also say I'm not a huge PowerPoint fan, and so I'll probably skip through these pretty quick, but wanted you to see a little bit about who is on the Coordinating Council, or the Government Coordinating Council, as was mentioned earlier. There's also a Sector Coordinating Council. We did need more acronyms in elections, so it was great to also incorporate national security space into this. Again, here's more membership, but really what it boils down to is having a lot of stakeholders in the room and having those conversations that we need to have ahead of time. And so back to EAC, obviously we are a part of the Government Coordinating Council. We were as was mentioned, we are facilitators. One of the things that we happen to do is know about elections. And so when there was some of that pushback early on, and certainly, DHS, they protect the homeland. We do elections. And so it was really great to be able to work with them, help them talk to election officials, talk with election officials, and that has been a lot of progress. But so moving back to what we do as we work with election officials, a lot of it is providing resources or opportunities for them, as you heard a lot about yesterday. Resources is a real challenge in the election space, and so to the degree that we can highlight best practices through the cleries, as Don was talking about, or make quick start guides, or we did a few videos that people were able to distribute to their voters or personalize. Certainly we made some checklists, which if you know anything about elections, checklists are a big part of it. So we have managed to do that, and we also have done a fair amount of IT management training. Our former commissioner, Commissioner Masterson, liked to say that election officials are IT managers. I've heard some dispute of that, but undoubtedly they have to have a role. And so one of the big things that he did, but then certainly some of our testing and certification staff would do, is go out and do IT management training, helping folks understand or get information about what they can do to implement cybersecurity best practices and technology best practices. And this is our contact information if anybody wants to reach out to us. But I think the thing that we're really excited about, I think, being here, and again, there are three of us here. Commissioner McCormick would have loved to have been here, but she was not able to. But I watched a lot of the conference yesterday, not all of it, so I'm sure there were some valuable things I missed, but it was just great to see the dialogue that was happening, the variety of stakeholders that are here. In particular, I enjoyed the Michelle Bishop, Josh Benelow, and Alex Halderman panel. I definitely learned a lot about math in it, so that was good. But the reality is, this is a challenging issue. Specifically election security is extremely daunting. And then you get back to the wheel and everything that election officials have to do. And then, as you heard yesterday, cattle branding was a new one for me. That was new, and cemeteries. But, this is just the elections wheel. And so then you throw on the other wheels. I don't have any idea what goes into cattle branding, but I'm sure it has its own spectrum. And so, I think that understanding those challenges and what we ask local election officials to do is hugely important for people in this space to help with effective solutions. And in particular, understanding the election calendar as well, in the sense that a great idea may not be a great idea in September of an election year, but it might be in March of an off year. And so, having that, and both ways, in the sense of, I'm sure, I won't name names because maybe I don't know them, but, I'm sure that election officials have been short in their responses when someone says, I've got a great idea for you, and you go, and that election official goes, thanks, it's October. I am locked down, I am holding on. But clearly there are passions about these issues, and there are smart people thinking about small slivers of one piece of this. And those answers and those solutions are certainly of value to the elections community. And I think the challenge that is often the case and is very common is figuring out the time and the delivery system to have that dialogue. And I think conferences like this are a perfect opportunity. So we're very excited to be here. Look forward to continuing that conversation. And I will stop talking now, but I will leave up the wheel because it is important.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much. And you all talked a lot about what the EAC's role in election security is. What are your personal priorities in the election security space during your time at the EAC?
Vice Chair. All right. I think first and foremost, one of the real challenges of election security is recognizing how broad of a topic that is. Obviously the primary focus, I would say, of this conference is on the machines themselves and ensuring the integrity of the vote. But, and there was some discussion of it yesterday, certainly more this morning. But the spectrum of what election security is, from voter registration, to election night reporting, to everything in between. And so, I think that one of the real challenges is that everybody, you have to do a risk assessment. You have to look at those vulnerabilities and figure out what you can do to mitigate those. And you look at the likelihood that certain things are going to be a factor. So from disinformation, misinformation, which if you have not accepted as a given yet, it's time to. That is going to happen. Helping to educate people to how the system works. One of the great, decentralization is an amazing strength for our system for a variety of reasons. It allows for innovation. If you think about the challenges of federal legislation, putting my old hat back on for a minute, they are hard. And if we had to pass federal legislation to start the ball on risk limiting audits, think about that, what that would be. But the folks in Colorado are doing ballot comparison audits and showing us how to move forward. Rhode Island's coming, Virginia's coming. There are these pilots around the country that are showing people how to do this. And that's huge. But the flip side to that is that there are, with those variations in the system come challenges with education. And so helping your fellow citizens understand how to get registered, understanding that they need to update their registration, getting them to participate, those are all huge things that we can do. I rambled a little more as far as my own priorities, but I think it's figuring out those and figuring out where we, the Election Assistance Commission, can hit a sweet spot, working with our partners like DHS, but being a value add to the broader community. And then I guess one thing in particular that I will highlight, because I really think that it is a very useful development. Again, we heard a lot about the challenges that local election officials face, and they are real. And, that is, again, the nature of our decentralized system. And I think you've seen some states innovate. In particular, I'd highlight Illinois' usage of their HAVA funds to implement cyber navigator programs. As we heard yesterday, there are counties that maybe have one IT official, and certainly it's not an election cybersecurity expert. And so, the Cyber Navigator programs where the states have implemented, the states have hired a number of officials who go down and help those counties on these specific issues, I think is a tremendous way to recognize the nature of our system and embrace that, but also get the security that we need.
No, I didn't expect you.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
And done.
So I've had the privilege of being at the EAC for the last 4 years and seeing a lot of the transformation of the agency from one where we were basically on the chopping block for a number of years to where we've been in, Susanna Spalding just talked a little bit about it in terms of getting credit for setting up or helping to set up the GCC and being an integral part of that. And helping to navigate between the election officials and DHS, a lot of the issues revolving around the government coming in, being looked at as being coming in to take over elections when that wasn't the case. So I hope that as we move forward with 2020 and 2022, 2020 is going to be an interesting year in terms of and I say this a lot, but I don't know if a lot of folks hear it. It's the 100th anniversary of the League of Women Voters and women getting the right to vote. And I think it's going to be a huge year for turnout. And so in terms of folks getting out, I want to ensure that their confidence remains high so that they know that the vote that they cast is being counted accurately and having the opportunity to even cast a vote. So making sure the voter registration works well because those systems are web-facing and can be looked at as vulnerable to ensure that our testing and certification program remains steadfast and high. Other issues involving ballot design or poll workers and so forth are also incredibly high on my radar screen, but it's mostly to ensure that confidence remains high, because if people feel that their votes aren't being counted or if the machines are not counting those votes accurately, then they're not going to turn out. And those were some of the things I heard when I worked on campaigns of why should I go out and vote when my vote's not going to count, or it's the same people running, therefore I don't really care. So I think that's one of the main things that I would like to continue to work on. And so that means not just talking to election officials and advocates, but also potential voters, because it's been documented that people, when they start voting early, in terms of their age, that they continue on as they move up down through their life cycles. And Eddie Hales reminded me of this, and I'm sad that I can't do it anymore. But to serve as a poll worker, I think is very important, and it's a little piece of giving back to the country in terms of government service. But it's also very important that you're there to help ensure that people aren't meddling in our elections physically and so forth. So I think that those are things that I would like to continue on. I think that still showing the agency's value, because I think that there are a lot of folks who don't know our value. One of the reasons I love playing that video, I call it my mom video, because even though I've gone on to college and law school and traveled around the world, they always ask me, what do I do? And so I show that video to them and they still ask. But it's also, even members of Congress don't know about our agency. And I testified before a committee last year, and a member said, with all due respect, I've never heard of your agency. And so it's one of these things of, that's a good thing in terms of we get our job done and not cause a lot of disruption or in the headlines, but it's a bad thing in terms of, folks not knowing. And so I want to continue on with doing our job and getting, more people out there to vote and helping election officials and keeping our head down. But I also want to make sure that we talk about all the good things that we do as well.
Thank you.
Sure. A couple of priorities. I think that the I think one of the biggest threats to our system in this environment, we were just at this meeting, and you have the Department of Navy that's trying to defend itself, and the Coast Guard, frankly, against nonstop cyber attacks, and it's impacting their ability to communicate with each other. It's just much less vote, much less communicate with their election official, and so our state and localities may be dealing with the same thing, and the biggest vulnerability is the voter registration systems or the outward-facing websites, and we're no different or better than anybody else, and that's going to be a challenge. And how do we raise that awareness? We're not charged with regulating that, and we're not charged with the states have robust systems of with their IT departments with the executive branch. When I was in Florida and Virginia, those departments protected our agency, and we do our best to assist with the localities. But the big issue is voter registration systems, and how do we communicate with localities who may not have robust IT systems. And it sort of tied into the lines of communication. When I was in the Navy, the big thing about providing intelligence to individuals was how do you make it actionable for those in the fleet or the aviators who are flying, and you got to get it in the hands of the people that are operating. And so those are lines of communication that have to be developed. I'm hopeful that the EAC, because of our ability to communicate with officials, we have that sort of intimate relationship. But even as a state election official, it's a challenge to communicate with all your counties on some of these things. So the other thing I would just point out real quick is that our election infrastructure has been decaying for a while, and it's generally obsolete. So we generally need to improve and have a technology refresh of generally what we do in elections. And that's a message those are the fundamentals of making sure that your systems are as secure and accurate as possible, just having the most up-to-date systems. And we have to focus on those fundamentals, and I think the EAC can play a role with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think in our 2 minutes left, we can take one question from the audience. So this is John McCarthy with Verified Voting.
John McCarthy, Verified Voting. I'm the moderator of the next panel, and this just segues so well that I'd like to have you help tee up the next panel, and I thank the program organizers for doing this. 2 questions. Will VVSG 2.0, you mentioned that it may well change things in terms of certification. Do you think it's going to change things so that it will encourage testing individual components, like just a BND or just a scanner, rather than as parts of a monolithic integrated system? That's part one. And part two is, I've served on a number of standards committees, both before I retired and then more recently with what started out to be the IEEE committees and more recently the NIST, EAC, VVSG committees. A lot of good work has been done on those, and I'm curious, once the VVSG is adopted, will the requirements be part of that, or will they be kind of something separate that it will evolve? And will there be any kind of sort of ongoing standards committees? Having been in the international standards business, I know things always change, and certainly in the elections area, it's no exception on that. Will there be some kind of ongoing standards committee effort to help extend and revise these things as things go on?
Ben Hovland, DFO for the TGDC. I really appreciate those specific questions, and I will give you a general answer, which is I look at the VVSG 2.0 and what I hope that process I think obviously there's been the public working groups, and there's been a lot of dialogue, and this has been a long time coming, and we are excited to be out for public comment. If you haven't commented, please do. But one of the things that I think is sort of the great promise of EVSG 2.0, and I will say that I did see some recent coverage that sort of indicated that it was a failure in some way, that maybe this won't be done to be able to ensure that all the machines and polling places in 2020 are up to this standard. But I think that ignores that it is time for this portion of elections to mature. And VVSG 1.0 and even 1.1 were written and adopted in a different technological time. I mean, HAVA was passed at, unfortunately not the technological moment we would have wanted. The NVRA was, even earlier, obviously. But so as we look at what VVSG 2.0 can and should be, it's a voluntary system. So it's got to be something that people want to use and embrace. It's got to be adaptable. It's got to be able to respond to the market of the states. And really, I mean, the sweet spot for the EAC as going back to the CISA name change, our name is Election Assistance Commission. It's right there. First name election, second name assistance. We've got to be able to, or our sweet spot is recognizing that even though you've got this diversity across the country in how elections are run, there are economies of scale, there are similarities, and certainly the voting systems are one of those. And so, if we produce a system that the states embrace and use, then that benefits everyone across the country. And so I think that that's what we've got to do.
Thank you so much. I think we have run out of time. Really appreciate the commissioners joining us today. I will say that my last question for them that we did not have time for was to ask how we could help the commissioners and we could help the EAC. So I hope that you talk to them while they're here and ask them that question. I'm sure they have lots of suggestions. So please join me in thanking them.